Today's topic is going to be another session on 3D hex meshing. And last week we did this more manual process where we made kind of a 2D template mesh and we could spin or drag those elements in order to make the 3D mesh from the 2D mesh. But we as the user were kind of required to manually go in, specify drag directions, and make sure that at the end of the day, our solid was able to be connected with the mesh that we've made. So this mappable shapes is a way to, I would call this semi-automate this process. Unfortunately, not just a one-click solution, but hopefully reduces a bit of work. But in order to use the mappable solids function, we have to have these mappable solids. Mappable solid means that there is a source face, a destination face, and a surface that connects the source and the destination face. There are kind of some nitpicky rules that go along with this. So the source face, and in this case, the source and the destination face are completely interchangeable, but the source face can be made up of multiple surfaces. So if this was split down the middle or something, we could still count this as one source face, but your destination face can only be made of a single surface. So this could be split into a bunch of different surfaces, but this surface would have to stay one big surface. Another thing here, the hex mesh is going to follow, in this example, in this direction, but these lines along the way, just based on how the algorithm works for meshing, these lines are going to mean that it's not mappable. So we have to have what I like to think of as like a direct connection between source and destination face. There's a really easy solution here, fortunately, which is just suppress these edges here, and then we end up with a direct connection between the source and the destination. So while this is not mappable, once we suppress these lines, this solid becomes mappable. So that's a little bit of background here about why we're about to go kind of Mad Max solid editing, not in the simple model example, but in the case of probably your real world examples. I am actually going to show this on the same model we used last week, just so we can get a feel for how the workflow is different from the manual hex meshing. So we have this same set of surfaces. If I go here to mesh, all my 3D meshing tools, so here's Tetra, here's Hex. If we click Hex, it's actually going to take us to this older tool that does the same thing. But because we're trying to work in the new interface as much as possible, I'm actually going to use this new solid map tool. And you'll notice when I go to select something, it has to be a solid. And right now I just have a collection of surfaces. So that'll be the first order of business, is to actually make these into a solid. This intermediate step here I'm going to show is not necessary to get it into a solid. I just want to make this example slightly more challenging so I can show off a little more of the solid editing features. Without it, I think it becomes a little bit trivial. So just to crank up the difficulty a notch, I'm going to delete out these surfaces. Oops. Delete out the whole component. All right, so select surfaces. Control to get rid of these. All right, and this is just going to mean that I'm going to have to separate out. I'm going to have to separate out this boss component from this straight piece. Otherwise, they'd already come in as separate. I said we can't actually use this solid map tool on surfaces, so we are going to make a solid from the bounding surfaces. We'll come here to solids. We'll select the bounding surfaces tool. Just go ahead and select everything and hit create. And you'll see here, so these two surfaces had a shared surface. These are connected now and they are shared. Versus, I deleted the connecting surface out of here so that we could essentially chop them back up again. So now if I go to select a solid, these are actually connected. If I'd kept that surface, these would be two different solids, whereas this, because there were a surface here and a surface on this one, these are two separate solids. In order to use the solid map tool, we have to have mappable solids. Let's go and turn on the visualization. Right now we're just in automatic visualization, but we can turn on mappable. This greenish yellow color means it's mappable. We could solid map this portion of our assembly right now, and this red color is bad. It means it's not mappable. But we can certainly see why this rectangle is mappable. We've got multiple source faces over on this side. We have a destination face over here, a very clear path to basically just extrude out 2D elements so that they are 3D elements. Now we're going to work on this piece and making this all mappable. As we might imagine, I could, if I can mesh this here, I can drag it over here in this like kind of extrudable arc, I guess you could say. But this guy over here is going to cause some problems. So we're going to cut this up essentially so that we have connected mappable solids instead of one big unmappable solid. For a lot of this, I'm going to be using the split tool. By default, I think this is set to surfaces. You can split surfaces, but here we are worried about chopping up solids. So I'll select the solid that I want to chop, select the surface, in this case that I want to make the cut along, and hit split. So these are still not mappable, but they should at least be separate now. And they are. If I go here to my selection, I select this solid and this is not highlighted. So that's good. This is certainly going to be the easier piece here. So let's focus on this piece first. And there's not one right way to get to an answer. So I could come here, and this is probably the more difficult way to go about it. Select, I would want to chop this up by lines. Select a solid, and then I want to cut based on the bounding lines. So now I've cut what was originally one big unmappable solid into two separate mappable solids. So I can select them separately now. And lastly, over here, we have this cylinder. In this case, these lines aren't doing a whole lot except potentially making my life a little more difficult. So I'm going to suppress them. Maybe if you were doing this in a different way, you would want to keep those, and that's fine. If you were thinking that your mappable surface is going to go up and then over this way, those are gone. But now we still have the issue of I have multiple source faces over here. So this is going to have to be, to me at least, my source face. And I need to be able to map this onto a single destination face. So in order to get there, I'm going to cut this solid. And I'm actually going to do it with a plane this time. Like my tool. And I can see this is actually aligned, this line in the global Z direction, but if it wasn't, you could drag this in whichever way. I accidentally dragged this down, so I'm just going to fix it in the text box. So maybe that's all right. And once you have this is kind of obnoxious and in the way sometimes, so you can just hit review to make sure that cut's going to be exactly where you want. And from here, we can say split. All right, we now at least have a fully mappable setup. I'll get out of the editing tools, go back and try and mesh this with the solid map tool. Right now, I just have this auto detect source and destination face, meaning it's going to choose whichever these faces it thinks and whichever is the easiest for it to map. We will specify a mesh size of 10. By default, this is going to be a mixed mesh, meaning that we have triads in there. If we don't want that, or if we want to adjust things like the density along here, we can do that. We are going to go ahead and do a face edit here and say, instead of mix, let's do quads only for all of these. And now we're going to fill in this 3D hex mesh. And there's certainly more work that can be done on this template. I don't love how this element looks, and I didn't actually end up getting rid of the trias here. So there's certainly some more editing that could be done. All right, so I think when I went to go mute everyone, I didn't actually confirm the all quads there. Let me quickly delete these off and see if we can't fix that. All right, say so now we do have some kind of unfortunate looking quad elements in there. We could go back, change things like the density, or even manually provide a template mesh for this to go on and really get full control over that.